So we already covered all that. So let's just talk about our agency bills. And again, next month, when we've had crossover day, we'll do a little bit of a deeper dive on any legislation that has a transportation impact or at least transportation adjacent. We just want to wait and see what crosses over. But the first bill, bill number 1, is Senate Bill 353. It dealt with some cleanup on our P3 statute as well as our alternative contracting methods. It had the coroner delegation language, which allows for if we've got a significant crash with a fatality on an interstate or a limited access highway, like everybody else, the coroner, just like anyone else, is going to have a hard time accessing the crash site. This would allow them to be able to delegate to medical personnel on site the ability to do the declaration of death, which then allows for the body to be moved and the crash site to be resolved. So that's included in this language, as well as some additional language on public, privacy protections for public, any kind of data that could connect people to the roadways and things like that. So it's passed the Senate 51-1 on January the 29th. It's passed out of the House Transportation unanimously this morning, or not this morning, on the 8th. And then this morning, the Rules Committee put it on the calendar for Friday. So if it passes the House as is on Friday, it should then go to the governor. The other bill is House Bill 516, which deals with increasing the quick response project threshold from 200,000 to 500,000. That hasn't been adjusted in over 10 years, and we've seen in the field districts just the impact of those increased costs, and we know how popular the quick response program is, as well as another little tweak dealing with timing of the public meeting and the final board approval in our P3 code section. So that would pass the House 167-2 on the 12th. And then I'll commend you that Derek McCollum, Representative Derek McCollum, is the person who carried the legislator who carried the bill, and that was actually his first bill as a legislator. So you can see the picture there. He's laughing because one of the things they do is they kind of ask some questions to prod, a little bit of funny questions, a little bit of hazing, light hazing going on with legislators. So you can see the smile on his face, and then everyone clapped for him once the bill passed. So we certainly appreciate Representative McCollum as well as Senator and Chairman Dolezal for carrying our legislation. So before I go to the federal piece, is there any, maybe this would be a good point to ask, are there any questions?
Thank you, Josh. On the quick response inflation adjustment from 200 to 500, that's for GDOT?
Correct.
If you wanted to partner with a county or something, they put so much, would that in any way
that just affects GDOT's procurement? There's actually a separate code section that deals with local governments and their thresholds for contracting.
Okay, thank you.
And again, as a reminder, under those, we seek 3 bids and then award to the lowest bid under the quick response program. All right, moving on to sort of the state of play and dealing with federal funding. And here we are again, we're on the 15th, and then we've got the current continuing resolution for transportation agencies as well as the other half of the government expires on March the 1st. I know the chief engineer and the commissioner will have comments later today to kind of talk through some of the impacts of being in this time crunch that we're in today. But you can see based off that calendar, the days between now and March the 1st, you can see the days the House is in session is highlighted in yellow, and then purple is for the Senate. That gives you some sense of kind of the timeline of when they might move legislation on the floor. I mean, if I had one of those magic 8 balls, I could probably roll it right now and give you an answer as to what Congress is going to do. I think they're they had hoped to work through a regular process and move the bills. They've given them this time to move the individual appropriation bills, but they've not been able to move appropriations bills. So the likelihood that we're dealing with some kind of a CR or an omnibus maybe, but maybe even a CR, unfortunately, again, is very possible. So that just gives you some sense of the next couple of weeks and the timeline of March 1st. So are there any questions on the federal piece before I go to the last slide? And so, Mr. Chairman, I want to end on a somber note, recognizing the passing of Chairman Richard Smith from Columbus. Just, a genuinely decent human being, a good friend. I count him as a personal friend. So when you could go in there and you'd think you're going to have short conversation about one thing and y'all end up talking about everything. And he's been a really good friend, was a really good friend of this department, supportive of this mission, supportive of this board, supportive of our commissioner. So I wanted to just take this moment to recognize him.
Yeah, Kathy, I believe you have some comments to recognize you at this time.
Thank you, Chairman. I appreciate it. Ladies and gentlemen, Richard Smith was my friend, and I had the extreme privilege of working with him for over 30 years. He was a county extension agent, an interim city manager, a city councilor, and that was all before he went to serve under the Gold Dome in many roles, many committees, finishing as chairman of the Powerful Rules Committee. He loved all of Georgia and was a true friend to this agency and our mission. As Speaker Burns said at his funeral, he was a good man. I ask that you join me for a moment of silence in respect to the passing of Richard Smith, a true Georgia statesman. Thank you.
Concludes my report, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Kathy, for that recognition of Representative Smith. I had the pleasure, I actually chaired the Senate Insurance Committee when he was chairman of the House Insurance Committee and worked very closely with him. And he was, without a question, a terrific human being, just a really decent, good man. And he will be greatly missed. Thank you for your comments. Any other questions of Josh or any other comments from any member of the committee? If not, Josh, thank you for your report, and this committee stands adjourned.
I'll call the Finance Committee to order, and we will hear a report this morning from Ms. Whitworth.
Morning. Thank you, Chairman. Members of the board, I am here to mesmerize all of you with the budget numbers thus far. I will start out saying I'm just going to give on the amended 24 budget. I'm just kind of going to highlight from last month, go back over some of those areas, and I'm going to highlight what the House changes were in this. So I'll give you a little refresher along the way as well as highlight the changes. On this first slide here, you can see the additional of $57.9 million being brought into the budget. That was the interest earnings on excise. In the amended 24 budget, there was no changes to the Transportation Trust Fund fees and no changes to the Transit Trust Fund fees. However, down in state general funds, you'll see the $1.5 billion, don't get confused, billion dollars being added into the budget. And in that number, the House added, that's included in this, an additional $500,000 over what the governor's recommendation was. And I'll highlight in a few slides what that number was. On the next slide here, this chart, we lay out how the various categories are based, and you'll see the highlights in the House recommendation. The biggest change from the governor's recommendation to the House recommendation is in capital projects and in LMIG. You can see capital projects here makes up 67% of the overall department's budget. That consists of capital construction, capital maintenance, local roads admin, and the new program, freight infrastructure projects. Routine maintenance makes up roughly 13% of the budget, as well as general operations makes up roughly 7%. And in general operations, that's the administrative program, data collections is found in there, planning, program delivery, and traffic management. LMIG over the entire budget makes up 6%. However, the LMIG total is 10% of excise. GEO bond debt is roughly 3%, followed by intermodal at 2%, which is rail, transit, ports and waterways, and airport aid. And then the remaining 2, payments to CERTA and payments to the ATL, make up a little bit less than 1% of the overall budget. All right. I'll dive right into this. In airport aid, you'll see one of the big changes here was the $27 million. The House brought in an additional $27 million. They transferred that from the new freight program that was created. The governor's recommendation did not have a change in airport aid, but the House brought in from the freight program $27 million. In capital construction, the $8.5 million that you see coming in motor fuel, that was used to help offset some of the increased project costs. And then you see the big add of $659 million that was put into the budget by the governor as well to help offset some of those costs and deliver projects that we currently have ongoing in the pipeline. Capital maintenance, this is new. The $100 million add in state general funds, that $100 million was transferred from the new freight infrastructure program into capital maintenance. In this overall budget, you'll see transfers from the freight program into capital maintenance, into rail, and into airport aid in the House version. In this next slide, data collections, the $26,000. What that is that's the governor's recommendation of the $1,000 pay raise he gave state employees in December. All that is being brought into the budget and trued up in each of the individual budgets. You'll see the pay supplement will be highlighted in all the programs where people, personnel are staffed throughout this presentation. In departmental admin, the $3.7 million, this is an increase in excise. And what this did, it increases the IT cost as well as it's going toward replacing T-Pro that's been in the department for over 20 plus years. We're doing a replacement of T-Pro and we're adding additional resources for the huge next gen Workday project. What this is the state of Georgia, all of the state of Georgia software program has always been PeopleSoft. They're moving away from PeopleSoft and they're going to Workday. So what this is, you'll see those dollars being deployed in those areas. The $926,000, $426,000 of that comes from the governor's original recommendation for the salary supplements that I mentioned to you that were given to employees in December. However, the House did a $500,000 add, and this is the $500,000 add I was referring to that was added in state general funds. This is to install a pedestrian bridge in Augusta. Josh is working on this, getting a better understanding of what the intent of this is. So I'll report back out to you next month on some more details on that. In the freight infrastructure, you'll see it's being reduced from the governor's original recommendation of $641 down to $509. And as I said previously, those funds went to capital maintenance, airport aid, and to rail. LMIG, you'll see them truing up LMIG here at $5.7 million. What that is bringing the program up to be 10% of excise. So you'll see it going to $218 million. This is the big, you'll see $200 million has been removed in state general funds from LMIG and transferred over here into local roads admin. I will highlight on the reason of the transfer is under the statute under LMIG, the locals are required to produce a match for that. What they've done is they've moved it to local roads admin to eliminate the local match on the projects. However, we still plan on doing a call for projects and dispersing those based off the formula distribution that we typically use up underneath LMIG. All it did is it eliminated the match that the locals would have to come up with for the funding. Next, you'll see in planning the $32,000, in ports and waterways the $2.1 million, and in program delivery the $1.2 million. All of what those funds are is the $1,000 supplemental pay being trued up in the budget that the governor gave state employees in December. However, in program delivery, the additional $4 million is an adjustment for increased operational costs and to help with recruitment and retention in that program, as you can see, as the program is growing. All right, on the next slide, originally in the rail program, the governor had added $2.3 million to this program, of which $1 million was for a one-time state match for the rail plan update. That plan is required every 5 years by FRA, so this time for us to update that plan. There's also $102,000 that was put into it for the match for the state safety oversight program. And then there was $1.2 million of funding for operations and then the one-time salary adjustment. There was also put in by the House an additional $4.25 million in the rail program for the Class 2 rail upgrades. So that was an additional there by the House. The next biggest program that had the additional motor fuel coming into it from the excise adjustment is routine maintenance. And what that is, that's being used to combat all those increased contracting costs and material costs that you've heard the commissioner talk about. So that's going in to help in that program. And then finally on this slide, traffic management. There was a $3.4 million ad, which is going toward our hero recruitment efforts, as well as the 811 program, and that is an underground utility relocation program, as well as some safety projects. And then finally, the $361,000 is the $1,000 pay supplement that's going toward for the state employees. The last slide you see here on this is the transit program, and the $24,000 is the $1,000 pay supplement adjustment for state employees. As I will close by saying, as you heard Josh say, the commissioner went and met with the Senate last Thursday on our amended appropriations. We've got our Senate Appropriations Committee is passing out their recommendation next Tuesday, the 20th. The commissioner met this past Monday with the House for the fiscal year 25. So next month when I report out to you, hopefully we'll have our amended FY24 budget cleared up, and I'll give you the recommendations for 25. That's my presentation. If you have any questions, I'll be glad to answer. Yes, Mr. Lewis.
On the airport aid category, you mentioned freight in there too, if I heard it correctly. Do you by chance have any more details of that, of what the objective is related to that?
What I mentioned there, sir, I need to clarify that. In the $27 million was transferred from the new freight program. That's what it was being transferred for. You would just follow the regular call for projects under airport aid for the $27 million for the airport aid list.
Okay, thanks.
Sorry if I confused you.
It's easy to do.
Any other questions?
No more questions? Oh, yes, sir.
Just a comment is, Angela, you've already flipped, somebody already flipped back. I'll flip back to the total budget slide. For a moment, we need to reflect on what a wonderful opportunity this is to have over $1.56 billion added to our budget. So a huge thanks to the governor for the recognition of the investment in freight, as we've talked about for a very long time, and that we see freight impacts everywhere. And these are good challenges to have, that this state is doing so well in manufacturing and jobs and having the Port of Savannah. So you're creating that new freight program is a wonderful opportunity. And then the pure recognition and capital construction of the line item said to basically to advance the projects in the existing pipeline. And so I do put that word out there as the existing pipeline because a lot of people want to add new things to the pipeline. And you're going to hear from Meg just a little bit about increased cost, and we've talked about increased cost now for 3 or 4 months in a row. But I just, again, when you look at that and to see almost $4 billion, I'm a little bit greedy. I wish we could have rounded up so the budget was $4 billion, but it is just amazing. Again, I can't thank the governor enough for the recognition of in the budget of surplus going to transportation, and then also for the House and the Senate both, which has been so supportive and so helpful. As Angela went through the budget and made some tweaks and some moves here, and then when the Senate moves on theirs and get to conference committee, these are all good things. I mean, it is really a wonderful shot in the arm that will do many good things, and we've got a lot of work to do in front of us. I'm reminded that Tennessee got a good bit of money last year, and when I say last year, it was like in January and in December they announced what they were going to do with it. So we'll be announcing sooner than that how we're going to deploy these projects, how these dollars are going to go to keep projects from slipping and sliding back, and how we can maybe move some back in a little closer. And also on the freight is how we can really be strategic with that, about $509 million, I believe that was, how we can actually use that strategically to get some wonderful things going for this state. So I just didn't want to miss this opportunity. And, you know, again, let's, you know, thank your colleagues in the House and Senate and for what they're doing. And again, thanks to the governor for this wonderful opportunity. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
One thing. When I got on the board, the total budget was $2 billion, and we're getting $1.5 billion from the governor for this year. So that's amazing.
I can remember when it wasn't even $1 billion.
Any other comments? Thank you, Angie.
Thank you.
Anything else to come before the committee? If not, stand adjourned.
Okay, with that adjournment, I'd like to call to order the Equal Access Committee. Today on our agenda, we have Ms. Kimberly King, our EEO Director. She's going to be talking about the 2024 DBE goal setting and industry listening sessions. Ms. King.
Good morning. Thank you, Ms. Key, for that introduction. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, Commissioner. Thank you for allowing me to provide you this update to the Equal Access Committee. As Ms. Key indicated, I'm going to be talking to you about our 2024 DBE goal setting process and the listening session that we have begun doing already in response to not only that goal setting, but our own edification about the program experience that our industry is having. So, excuse me. Pursuant to 49 CFR Part 26, we have to attach a DBE goal to our federally funded projects. What that means is, because we are the recipient of federal funds, we have a DBE program. And our DBE program is one that goes from beginning to middle to end, meaning we do outreach activity. Very often, Ms. Key and I are doing that outreach activity together. We show up at the same places at the same time to do that outreach activity, but it's really important because what it does is allow us an opportunity to talk to the public, to talk to individual business owners that might be eligible for DBE participation in terms of being program participants, to explain to them what DBE is, how it could benefit their business, what it means for them, what it means for us here as an agency. So we do that outreach activity in hopes of identifying firms that might be eligible for participation. Once we've identified those firms and they begin submitting application for participation, we are responsible for reviewing those applications, for doing the assessment of those applications and making a determination of approval or denial of that DBE application. Once those new applicants are approved, or we have, of course, existing firms in our directory, we then are responsible for supporting those firms, supporting them in their engagement, supporting them in their training, supporting them in understanding how we can help them to get attached to some of those federally funded projects that we do here at the Georgia Department of Transportation. Once we have offered that support, gotten those firms attached to the projects, we're then responsible for monitoring those projects, monitoring them for compliance. So are the DBE firms that are working on those projects being paid? Are they being paid promptly? Are they being paid what they should be? Are they doing the work anticipated by the subcontract that they have? Do they have a subcontract? If they do, does the subcontract say what it needs to? What participation are they providing? What kind of work activity are they doing? Is the DBE identified in the subcontract doing the work anticipated by that subcontract? Are those DBEs that are there the DBE that should be there? We're going out to the project and we're doing that kind of monitoring. So that monitoring is all about the compliance piece. And then finally, Once we have those DBEs attached to the project and we've done that monitoring, we're responsible for reporting that participation to our Federal Operating Administration so that they have an assurance that we, in fact, are utilizing the funds that they have provided in the manner we say that we are utilizing those funds. So those DBE goals, based on 49 CFR Part 26, are set project specific. So every time we have a letting, we are there setting goals on those projects. But an overall agency goal must be communicated to our Federal Operating Administration every 3 years. So for federal highway, for federal transit, for federal aviation, we are reviewing and assessing a DBE goal, an overall agency goal, to communicate to that operating administration that we have this aspirational goal to which we aspire on all of our federally funded project activity. So what does that look like? Well, there are 2 steps to that goal setting process. The first is what we refer to as a step 1 base figure. So what we do is identify all DBEs that are ready, willing, and able to do the kind of work anticipated by our federally funded projects. That then is compared to all firms ready, willing, and able to do that kind of work. All firms meaning both DBEs and non-DBEs. Once we have that number, then we are weighting that number based on a work class code. So every work class code is then weighted to determine how much of that kind of work do we think we're going to be doing in the next 3 years. That's where that weighted factor comes from. And so that's what this looks like. That step 1 baseline goal then will tell us how many work class codes we anticipate using, how many DBEs we have in those codes, how many other firms we have in those codes, and then how much of that work we anticipate doing. We then do that step 1 base figure so that we can have what's called a step 2 adjustment. What is that? That is, how does GDOT do business? What have we done in the previous 3 years? In order to know what we're going to do in the next 3 years, we really do look back at those previous 3 years to see what our goal attainment has been, because our goal ought not to be wildly higher nor wildly lower than it has been. There should be some equilibrium to what that goal looks like in terms of setting that new goal. So we take that baseline figure, we get a median of the 3 previous years of goal attainment, we add those things together, we divide it by 2, and that is our new overall agency goal. So we have a goal for 21 through 23, and now we're going to be setting a new goal for 24 through 27. So we have to do this adjustment again. We've not started that process yet. Well, we have started that process, but we don't have those numbers for you yet, which is why you see 18, 19, and 20, which are the past 3 years that we used to do our 21 through 23 goal. So part of that DBE goal setting process requires what is referred to as a public consultation. What does that mean? That means that we are talking to the industry, we're talking to our DBEs, we're talking to the prime contractors with whom we do business, we're talking to interested individuals and organizations about what we are doing in terms of setting a goal. Those listening sessions are happening in Atlanta, in Augusta, Columbus, Macon, Savannah, and virtually, so that we have as much opportunity as possible to talk to as many interested individuals as possible. We've had 1 listening session already in Valdosta. That was in January. The others will be happening this month, March, April, May. We will be posting those on our website so that people are aware of them, so that the public knows when and how those consultations are happening. And we get a couple of things from those consultations. So obviously, folks get to tell us about their experience doing business with GDOT. We want to know, if you've done business with GDOT, what was that like? If you haven't done business with GDOT, why not? What do we need to do to assist you in doing business with GDOT? How can our supportive services be of a help to you in determining that you have an interest in doing business with GDOT? If you are doing business with GDOT as a subcontractor, what areas do you work in? How often are you working? What training, what support might you need to do more business with the agency? If you're a prime contractor, we want to know what work activities your firm has an interest in terms of subcontract to DBE. We tend to see the same sorts of work activities being done by DBE subcontractors, and we really want to grow the opportunities, the availability of opportunities to our DBE. So we need to know from our prime contractors, what kind of work activities are you subbing out? What kind of work activities would you consider subbing out if we had more DBEs in those work areas? So these public consultations really give us an opportunity to hear from the industry with whom we work about what their needs are, about how we can better serve those needs. And that helps us then to put together a curriculum during the course of the year that really speaks to what the primes and the DBE subs with whom we work want to accomplish, what they need to see, what's going to be helpful to them. So we have the public consultation, obviously, for the purpose of sort of assisting us in creating that curriculum, but also because it is responsive to what our Federal Operating Administration requires of us. Ultimately, however, we do all of that work in order to attain our goal. So our overall agency goal for the past 3 years has been 15%. As I said at the beginning of my comments, we must report the expenditure of those federal funds to those federal operating administrations, Federal Highway, Federal Transit, Federal Aviation. To Federal Highway, we reported in December of 2023 a 15.2% goal attainment. So we actually exceeded our goal. Thank you. This year, that dollar amount was $142,747,048 to disadvantaged business enterprises. That is real dollars in the pockets of those firms with whom we do business. Those are real dollars that they use to pay their employees, real dollars that they use to buy equipment and supplies to grow and further develop their firms. We know and understand how much those federal funds mean to our DBEs. The participation and success of our DBEs is not by accident, it is absolutely deliberate. We are spending time, energy, and effort in seeking out disadvantaged business enterprises to work on our projects, but not just our federally funded projects. We are assessing our state-funded projects for DBE participation. We understand that our goals need to be carefully assessed and attached to the project so that DBEs have an opportunity to work on these federal funded projects, to receive some of those federal dollars that we talk about. The how and why those goals are being set is communicated in a narrative format to those federal operating administrations every 3 years when we are submitting that goal methodology, and that submission provides us an opportunity to demonstrate to that operating administration that we know and understand what our role is as it relates to those DBE goals, both on our project-specific attachment as well as our overall agency goal. So DBEs are being engaged at GDOT. This is a slide of a DBE forum that we hosted last year in October, where we had our municipal partners, we had prime contractors, prime consultants, DBEs, small businesses, all there to talk about what kind of business they do, to talk about how they can get engaged at GDOT, to talk about what kind of supportive services we are able to offer. How can we help you do business at this agency? Networking is something we hear all the time from our DBEs in terms of the kind of assistance they're looking for. Can we have some matchmaking with the prime contractors that do business with this agency so that we can get to know those prime contractors? Business does business with business they know. And so we make opportunity available for those businesses to get to know one another. DBEs certainly are sometimes looking for opportunities to do joint venturing, to partner with one another. Networking provides that opportunity, provides an opportunity to get to know those prime contractors that do business with us so that they can then do business with those prime contractors. This is a slide from a professional services outreach event we did last year. And we distinguished professional services from construction services because they're different. The needs of the consultant community are different sometimes from the needs of the contracting community. And so recognizing that, we have two different kinds of meetings because we want to very specifically speak to the audience about what their needs are, and what the needs of the construction community are going to be different than the needs of the professional services engagement community. So we want you to understand that we know who our audience is, we speak to that audience, we provide very specifically for that audience. So ultimately what we're trying to do is help you find your point of entry, if you will, at the Georgia Department of Transportation. What kind of work do you do? Is that the kind of work anticipated by a GDOT project? Sometimes and our friends at the Department of Administrative Services have recognized how well we support our DBEs, such that they're asking us to assist them in supporting DBEs. And so sometimes what we're finding is the work that the DBE firm does may not be work that is anticipated by GDOT, and that's okay. We can help you find work someplace else in the state. That's what we're helping the Department of Administrative Services to do. That means that we are finding those opportunities, finding those points of entry for DBEs and small businesses here in Georgia, because we want to continue to make Georgia the best place to do business. And we believe that our contribution as it relates to disadvantaged business enterprise absolutely helps there. So that is the extent of my presentation. I certainly am able to answer any questions that you might have, but I appreciate your giving me the opportunity to have this discussion. Yes, ma'am.
Questions, comments, thoughts?
I think you sort of wrapped it up in your final comments, but I want to sort of drill down a little bit. Excuse me. So these listening sessions that you're having are not necessarily exclusive to potential DBEs or DBEs that want to do business specifically with GDOT, correct? If there's somebody in my community that's interested in getting this recognition, they could still benefit from the listening?
Absolutely.
Okay.
The listening session is certainly the core rationale for that listening session is to talk to you about your ability to do business with GDOT. Have you done business with us? Do you want to do business with us? Are you capable of doing business with us? And so the folk who have that interest may not be capable of doing business with us now, but we can talk to you about how to get that capacity, what you need in terms of not only certification, but pre-qualification, registration, every aspect of the business that happens at GDOT. We're able to offer you some information and advice, even if it's you need to call Albert Shelby, you need to call Mark Mastronardi, you need to call Patrick Allen.
Well, I think it's incredibly impressive that that GDOT and the professionalism within your department is recognized, so that this department handles the DBE process for the entire state, regardless of what industry or sector is involved. And I would hope that you will send out those dates once they're established to the board.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
I'll do that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I just have a couple, Kimberly, just quickly.
Yes, ma'am.
That $142 million, that were federally funded projects.
That's correct.
Incremental, we have dollars that we're tracking on the state projects as well?
We do routine maintenance. We talked a little bit about the quick response. We're tracking there.
Okay.
On our capital construction, we're tracking there. TIA, we're tracking there. So DBE is a consideration for GDOT beyond the federal dollar.
Correct, okay. And then the last thing is telling the story. You know, we're doing some good things, as Kathy mentioned. What's the plan, in engaging Scott and his team to tell the story so that people know exactly what statewide, what's happening and what GDOT is doing?
The plan is to have those conversations, obviously, with the communications team. I'm actually meeting with Katina Lear on the communications team next week to talk about that. I met with Ron Battle about a month ago to talk about how we can expand our web presence, to talk more about what we do and how we do it. So we're always thinking about how we do that, but very often we get so caught up in doing the work that we don't always remember to sort of label the work and identify what we're doing. So that's a very nice reminder. Thank you.
Yes, great.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, job well done. Thank you. No further questions, Equal Access stands adjourned.
The P3 committee now will come to order, and I would like to ask Tim Matthews, our State Express Lane Administrator, to give us an update on 285.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, commissioners. Pleasure to be with you this morning to give you an update on our I-285 Express Lane project. First, we'll go over just an overview of the express lanes and what they are. We'll go through the delivery approach that we're bringing for these projects. Talk about express lane transit and what we're doing as it relates to transit for express lanes, and then some scope and activity overview for the projects. Just first, a reminder of what do express lanes provide. They provide an option to manage time-sensitive trips, such as going to the airport or picking up your child from daycare. I've got 2 teenage boys, and I remember how much it was to be late picking them up at daycare, and trust me, tolls are cheaper than the late fees for daycare. Is added capacity. We're not taking away any lanes that exist on the GP system, so we are adding new capacity, new lanes, barrier separated for express lanes. Across the country, and more importantly in Georgia, we are providing commuters with faster and more reliable alternatives to congested highway lanes. Just look at our existing system that is operating today on 75 and 85. It's an important transit solution. These provide a semi-dedicated right-of-way that for buses that can use the system free of charge. So we don't charge bus service to get into the express lanes. You do have to pay to get into the bus, but you don't have to pay a second charge to use the express lane system. They're sustainable. Gas-powered vehicles in toll lanes generate fewer greenhouse gases emissions than does in stop-and-go traffic. So imagine gas vehicles stop and go on the general purpose lanes is creating more emissions than cars moving through the express lanes. In our ongoing efforts to deliver the best and much-needed infrastructure projects to Georgia, GDOT will deliver these projects as a public-private partnership, or P3, delivery model. This effort started with the State Route 400 Express Lane project, which is currently in procurement and uses the same P3 revenue risk model. These projects will be broken down into phases to better manage the overall delivery of the corridor. Each project will have a base phase with extensions to achieve the full build-out. These projects are not cheap, trust me, which is the reason we have to break these projects into parts and pieces. We plan to leverage the private sector ability to finance these projects with a goal to maximize competition and optimize the amount of public funding needed for the projects from the state. This approach provides a number of benefits to Georgia taxpayers, users of the 285 Express Lane system, local communities, and all motors in the I-285 corridor. It also continues Georgia's highly successful track record in delivering impactful new transportation projects that dramatically improve congested interstate corridors while using innovative funding and finance methods. The addition of express lanes will improve mobility along this section of 285 you see on the screen here between roughly I-75 and I-85, one of the most heavily traveled congested interstate systems in America. More than 240,000 vehicles travel across this stretch of highway every single weekday. This project focuses on adding 2 new barrier-separated express lanes in both directions along I-285 and State Route 400 to the North Springs MARTA station, alongside the existing general purpose lanes. As you can see in the fly-through video on the screen there, some sections will be at grade and some sections will be elevated. And that, like the Northwest Corridor project, and that's due to the dense commercial and residential real estate adjacent to I-285. Access to the express lanes will be provided at various locations and may be new interchanges or direct merge ramps along the corridor. Procurement, final design, and construction of the proposed project will be in phases, as I mentioned earlier. The department will procure a private sector partner who will design, construct, operate, and maintain the proposed express lanes for the project. Okay. Some of the key activities and milestones for this project to date. The department is currently acquiring some of the needed right-of-way along the corridor to protect land from any new private development. Using the early acquisition regulation in Title 23 CFR 710.501, a state agency may carry out early acquisition on projects as appropriate. To date, we've acquired about 72 parcels of the needed 324 for just the top end piece between 75 and 85. The draft environmental impact statement is in development with public hearing open house scheduled for Q2 of 2024. Procurement and construction schedule for the final phases. For the initial phase of the 285 Express Lane project is under review. More information will come later this year to you on those schedules. There's been a robust stakeholder and community outreach engagement for this project with many stakeholders, neighborhoods, and community groups over the past several years. Some come in the form of community conversations, which are informal types of public open houses, as well as formal public information open houses as required by environmental law, NEPA. We continue to regularly engage with our key stakeholders throughout the project development phase and expect to continue to do so during the final design and construction with a focus on limiting impacts to the community while accommodating travel needs for the public. In addition to the top end, we will deliver express lanes on the east side and west side of 285 as well. The scope of the east side project includes 2 new barrier-separated express lanes in each direction from, on the east, Henderson Road down to the interchange at I-20 and I-285 on the east. This includes various express lane connections along the corridor, including US 78, Henry Indian Creek, MARTA Station, to name a few. Similar to the top end project, this section will be delivered in phases as well. Conceptual designs and environmental analysis are still being evaluated and developed, with federal environmental NEPA document for the project will be updated, and additional public involvement will be conducted at a later date. Like the east side, the scope of the west side project will bring 2 barrier-separated express lanes in each direction as well. The project limits are from South Atlanta Road to the interchange at I-285 and 20 on the west, which is currently in procurement right now. This includes various express lane connections along that corridor. You don't see them on the screen here, but there will be various connection points, either interchanges or direct merges for travelers to get in and out of the system. This section will be delivered in phases, just like the other projects. Again, conceptual design and environmental analysis are underway, with more information to come at a later date as it relates to those schedules. As I talked about in the beginning, these projects are important for transit because transit service providers can use the system for free. So it often gives opportunity for new transit service providers to get into a corridor they may not be in today because of heavy congestion. So we believe this is an expansion of a current system or a new system that they may not be in today. As I mentioned, transit service can get into the system for free, but also registered van pools can use the express lane system as well. And it provides reliable trip times and often faster travel times in the corridor versus your general purpose lanes that are out there today. And as I mentioned earlier, reduces vehicle emissions for folks traveling the express lane. And finally, offers you an opportunity to do some other things while instead of driving your car if you're in a transit service provider taking that route. Building on the success of transit coordination on the State Route 400 project that's currently in procurement, GDOT, in collaboration with MARTA, the ATL, ARC, and the 4 Metro County, Atlanta counties, Cobb, Fulton, DeKalb, and Gwinnett, signed a historic MOU, which has been presented to you before, to bring transit solutions along the I-285 Express Lane corridor. This effort is consistent with the approved Fulton and DeKalb County Transit Master Plan, so we're in alignment with that effort. This goal is to enhance transit operations by using our express lanes that we're building while exploring new opportunities for stations along the adjacent 285. Studies are currently underway on this process to determine operating requirements, station locations, and conceptual designs. What's to come? Some of our next steps include reaching out to the P3 industry to gather information via a request for information, or RFI. This purpose is to provide an update on our proposed delivery strategy, solicit feedback on our proposed commercial terms. We anticipate releasing the RFI March 1st of this year and hold a round of one-on-ones with the market to gain insight into market conditions as well as industry expectations. Our number one goal here is to strengthen early collaboration, and that may bolster innovations and jumpstart a more robust industry engagement. Finally, just a few milestones. As I said earlier, we're in an active procurement for State Route 400. You see, we expect to have a best value selection in August of this year, with commercial close of that contract coming in November. The I-285 Express Lane project, as I mentioned, is currently in environmental review approval. We're going to release the draft EIS as soon as we have that assigned by FHWA, and then have a public hearing open house in Q2. And for the express lanes, we're going to do a webinar, and we're going to have requests for information, or RFI, go out March 1st, as I mentioned. And we'll continue with our express lanes procurement planning as it relates to the model as we're delivering. And then we'll have an NOIA industry forum, and then a request for qualifications later this year, first part of next year. With that, that concludes my presentation on I-285 Express Lane project. I'll entertain any questions that you may have.
Any questions, Mr. Boswell?
Any idea of the future of the express lanes might be complete between 400 and 75. Top end.
Well, we're gonna start the procurement process later this year, which will get us the private developer to come on to design, build, finance, operate, and maintain that. So we don't have a set schedule yet. That's what we're working on right now, and then doing that market engagement with the industry, determining right sizing of projects so they can, bid on the work, and then we'll know what a schedule looks like from there.
Unbelievable project.
How big is the pool of companies interested and willing to do projects like that?
It's not very big, I'll say that. Often, sometimes only a handful, honestly. And these are a lot of international players in this market because they're billions of dollars, and you have to have that, or leverage the private sector and the finance industry to bring that kind of money to the table. So it's often just, you know, big players, but not a lot of them in the market. But all the networking we've done in the industry over the past several years shows there's a huge interest in Georgia's program because we have a big program, a pipeline of projects. We don't just have one, which really attracts those folks to come do business in Georgia.
I'd like to make a comment because we have a staff and they've done a magnificent job in preparing and what they're doing down there in procuring these type projects because, you know, that's the only way we're going to be able to fix what we're doing. And they have really worked hard and they've got a lot going on down there. And I think we're going to see the results here very shortly, the impact it's going to have on our state and especially our region here in the region of Atlanta and surrounding areas.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Thank you I just want to follow on to a couple of comments there. Tim is right. This work that we're doing currently with 400 and the interchanges at 285 and I-20 that are underway and one's in the procurement, and then now 285. This is truly the biggest program in the nation. And so there is a lot of interest, to Mr. McIntyre's question, there is tremendous interest from the industry of, you know, wanting to pursue the work in Georgia. That's why this request for information is so vital, is to have all the interested parties at the table to truly listen and understand their pressure points, the things that they bring to us so that we can bring forward a very competitive procurement. So, and a lot of that is its sizing, and that's why, as Tim talked about, that this is, we'll have the first piece be sort of a traditional procurement where there is sort of it'll be a best value selection of technical points and price point, but then that gives that person the ability to go do the next piece and the next piece. It's too big to do as one project. It's just, there's nobody that can bite off that big of a project to understand. You saw the flyover videos through there. This is complex, large work, especially at some of the interchanges. So we're really wanting to hear from the industry of, you know, where their pressure points are. We've done a lot of good work. Hats off to Tim and his team and Mark and Haral now engaging with the industry to understand the risk scenarios such that the industry is really wanting to be here in Georgia. It's been fantastic. I mean, we get lots of meeting requests for, you know, everybody wanting to come talk about this program that's going on. And the other thing I just want to mention to get to your question of when can you ride on it? Yes, you will. Jamie said I won't be here. Yeah, you will. It's going to take us time. This is going to take some time. One, when you're doing multi-billion-dollar procurements, that takes a while to get through that process. And then it takes a long time to get things built, as we know. So, but if we never start this journey, we'll never get there. And this is a little bit of a journey on 285 because it's good ways around, 30-something miles, I believe, on this top half. But we're trying to do it in the most effective way we can. Again, to optimize public funding, provide a true public benefit, and go as fast as we can without causing it to be too fast that causes less competition, things like that. So really trying to get the porridge correct, you know, as Goldilocks like. So the other thing I just want to mention, and I think Tim said this, is we'll have a presentation coming up here shortly about the work that's going on the transit portion of the express lanes, because there's actually a study underway. He mentioned that multi-county MOU or MOA, whatever, I forget what is it, an A or a U? MOU, which is truly historic. I just, again, if you think about Cobb and Gwinnett joined in with DeKalb and Fulton to study express lane transit, and that whole study that everybody's supportive of only exists because of this express lane project that we're doing. And it's how Cobb and Gwinnett each have their own transit referendums will be able to access all these job centers around 285, like, Perimeter and Pill Hill and Cumberland and Dorville and Chamblee. I mean, it's really amazing to see. I'll just put it this way: I've never seen quite the support we have among mayors, counties, the Atlanta Regional Commission, the ATL, MARTA, GDOT, of all of us working together to accomplish this project, because it does more than just the express lane for cars. It has a huge transit benefit for this region as we add 2 million people to the Atlanta metro region in the next, by 2050. So this is a huge amount of work. Hats off for Tim. Tim actually could run for city council or mayor in most cities because he's been at so many city council meetings, standing before the cities, talking about this project and talking about what all's involved in it. And I kid him about that all the time. But he's been to a lot of meetings. I've apologized to his wife many times because he's at meetings late at night and out there in the public, sharing information about this project. And again, we'll have more public engagement, a lot more public involvement as we go forward. But we're at a really good point, so I just want to thank him and the entire team for informing you that we're sort of getting started. A lot of work's been going on, without a doubt. We've had public meetings, but now we're really sort of engaging the industry and get the procurement underway, maybe faster than the timeline he showed. But anyway, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, for indulging me there.
Thank you. Is there any other questions? Thank you again, Tim, for that fine presentation on our future. This is our future.
Thank you very much.
We stand adjourned.
I'd like to call the committee of the whole in order. Upon the impact of construction inflation, Meg Perkle is going to bring us some information, and she's our chief engineer.
Thank you. It's great to be here with y'all today. Good morning. So thanks for allowing me some time today to speak about cost increases and the federal budget. Josh touched on the continuing resolutions we're seeing at the federal level, and just to talk a minute about how that impacts our GDOT lettings. Last October, you heard from Eric Rohde about the cost increases that we're seeing in our construction bids. And in December, the commissioner presented to you about the impact that increased costs are having on GDOT's overall program. But today's presentation is a little different because I want to talk about a unique situation we're in where we're almost 75% of the way through the state fiscal year, but GDOT has only received a little over 40% of the proposed federal funds that the state was appropriated in the IIJA for FY24. So I want to talk about how this is starting to impact GDOT's lettings on a month-to-month basis. This busy chart is from FHWA, and it's a little bit of an eye test, I admit, but this chart shows 4 indexes. They all measure cost data. They are all indexed relative to each other, going back to 2020. And what we're looking at here, starting at the bottom, is the Employment Cost Index, the ECI, that's the yellow line, the Consumer Price Index, the blue line, the Power Producer Index, the green line, that's based on the average selling price of domestic energy producers, and the National Highway Construction Cost Index, that's the red line, the one on the top. All of these indices have a bearing on each other and on the overall cost of construction. But the notable thing about the NHCCI is that it is data that FHWA collects from states based on actual project bids for major highway construction. So it reflects the cost data for steel, aggregate, concrete commodities, and several other highway construction items. From 2020 to 2023, the NHCCI grew faster than the others by about 60%, and it hasn't stopped. So the main point I want to make with this slide is that the transportation projects costs are outpacing the CPI and other indices for inflation. Even though the other indices have moderated or lowered, highway construction has not. So how do these cost increases affect our program of projects? This chart represents the 4 years of programmed projects that we call the STIP. And the STIP, by law, is a fiscally constrained list of funded projects. When we see increased project costs, these increases end up having almost a compounding effect on the program. For example, if you have increased cost in this current year in FY24 of about $300 million, that means $300 million of planned projects can't be funded in FY24. They roll, as we say, to FY25. And FY25 is already fiscally constrained. So rolling one fiscal year to the next, it can be very minor. It can mean a project in June gets let in July. To us, that's a really big deal, but maybe to most people that's not such a big deal. But it has a cascading effect, because then you roll another $300 million, so a total of $600 million from FY25 to FY26. And the same thing happens again. You end up rolling $900 million from FY26 to FY27. And so with all of these cost increases and new projects, because they come along too, you end up delaying almost a whole year of the STIP due to these cost increases. So the 4 fiscally constrained, so just that was an example, but what's really happened in the STIP that you all approved last year is that we've already seen a cascading effect of shifting of about 183 projects within the STIP, and that's a total of about almost $1 billion. So let's add a complication to these impacts of the increasing costs, and that is the fact that, as Josh mentioned this morning, the federal government has not fully funded this year's budget. The state fiscal year starts on July 1. The federal fiscal year starts on October 1. So in Georgia, when we get to October, GDOT has already advance funded 3 months worth of federal projects with our state budget. The technical term for this is advance construct, but it means that we use our state budget authority to cover federally funded projects until we get the federal funds that are appropriated to us in October. Covering this 3-month gap is normal practice and usually works in our favor. At the end of the federal fiscal year, FHWA does what we call redistribution of unspent funds. But when they give you these funds, you only have about a week to authorize them on eligible projects. So we're in great shape for federal redistribution every year at the end of the fiscal year, because we have 3 whole months worth of projects advance funded and ready to convert to federal. And we usually get a healthy amount of redistribution. I think our highest ever is about $200 million. But since we have not gotten a full year's appropriation, we can only stretch our state dollars so far to advance the federal program. To date this year, we have already advance constructed $628 million in federal projects. Now remember, by state law, we can't sign a contract unless we have the full contract funding available in the bank, unless it's a P3. So we can only AC a limited amount because we need to have our annual state budget to operate the department and fund state-funded projects, and you can only stretch it so far. What I've just added to the dates here are the 3 continuing resolutions we've had in this federal fiscal year so far. The last one, that was passed on January 19th, expires March 1st. So here we are. We've had limping along from continuing resolution to continuing resolution, where each day we get 1/365th of our federal budget. And on March 1st, what we have till then, they only gave us about $200 million with this last CR. And what we needed to fund the March and April lettings was about $500 million. So it was not enough. This slide shows a regular calendar with our monthly GDOT board meetings. Each month, Albert Shelby presents the projects in next month's letting for your approval for advertisement. The day after the board meeting, we advertise next month's letting. And on that same day, we open the bids for the projects you approved last month. Highlighted in red is the date the last continuing resolution was passed, January 19th, and the date that it expires, March 1st. The funds from this continuing resolution were not even available for our use until February 5th. So here we are in the middle of a continuing resolution, and we have to make hard decisions about the March and April lettings. As they say, timing is everything, so let me talk about this timing relative to the project letting schedule. This table shows all of the countdown deadlines that GDOT follows before a project is presented to the board for approval for letting. Because remember, timing is everything. Obviously, when we're developing projects, we work on them for years. But as we approach a letting, we want to ensure that everything comes together and that we meet all state and federal requirements and that we are advertising a project that is ready for construction. So we start a countdown 6 months in advance, and we check it monthly, every month until the letting. By federal law, FHWA must authorize funds prior to advertisement of a project for bids. And when we say authorize, we don't just mean that the funds are available. Authorized means a lot. It means we are certifying to FHWA that the project has met all federal requirements. The environmental is approved, the permits are in hand, the right-of-way has been acquired, and it's been acquired correctly. The utility agreements are all signed, and the plans, specifications, and estimates are complete and final. And the project must be funded in the approved STIP. And then FHWA will authorize construction funding for the project in the federal system. The dates I'm pointing to here with the yellow arrow. Note that the authorization deadline for the March letting is February 2nd. The continuing resolution passed on January 19th, and those funds were not made available to states until February 5th, 3 days after the March authorizations were due. The deadline for the April letting is March 1st, the same day the continuing resolution expires. So we know we cannot advance construct any more projects with our state budget. We've maxed out our AC capacity for the year. And there is no certainty what Congress will do on March 1st. I wish we had certainty, but we don't. So even though we expect that we will eventually get all of our federal funds, timing is everything, and we don't have it in time to fund the March or April lettings. So when Albert presents the letting for approval this afternoon, you'll see a much reduced list of projects. Typically, we try to balance our lettings somewhere between 100 to 200 million per month. But for March, you're going to see 8 projects with a total of about $33 million. Angela talked about the possibility of additional capital funds in the state budget, which is fantastic. But we have to wait for budget approval before we can put that money into our lettings. And those funds will greatly help with the cost increases I talked about at the beginning of this presentation. So let me go back to that for a minute. So Angela mentioned in her budget presentation that the House has proposed $100 million for capital maintenance in the amended budget. Capital maintenance is the budget we use for roadway resurfacing, striping and RPMs, bridge maintenance, bridge painting, overlays, those kind of things. So this chart shows the last 4 years of capital maintenance budgets for resurfacing. Fiscal year 24 to date is about $352 million. And even though we say year to date, that really is about the whole year's money for capital maintenance. And if you look at the last 3 years, we've had pretty comparable budgets. But look at the difference in the blue lines. The blue lines represent the center line miles we were able to resurface with that budget. And you see a huge difference. We're getting a lot less for our money, and the buying power of our resurfacing budget has greatly eroded in 4 years. We typically try to resurface roads about every 10 to 15 years on average, depending on the traffic and the condition of the road, which means that you'll be touching about 8 to 10% of the highway system annually. But 463 centerline miles is nowhere near 10%. It's only about 2.5%. And so that deferred maintenance will catch up eventually. So this extra $100 million will help us a great deal with our maintenance needs in FY24. Angela also mentioned the proposed additional funds for capital construction and a new freight capital program, and this funding is really great news. It will help to keep projects in this fiscal year and will play a bigger role as we move forward in FY25 and 26 with cost increases and keep projects from that role that we talked about. And also, you know, planning's been doing a great job with the freight plan and the Coastal Empire study, things like that, so that freight money will really go towards looking at where some freight needs are and helping maybe bring in a few additional projects. The final selection of projects and programs that these funds, new funds, will go towards, the ultimate decision is with planning. But I want you to know that the staff in delivery and engineering on this side of the house works very closely with planning to make sure that they understand project readiness and schedule status. Because the teamwork between our two groups is really crucial to make sure they're recommending projects that we can deliver on so that we all ensure a successful program. And we also have to carefully evaluate when we decide to apply these new state funds to a federally eligible project. We need to be sure we have the right number of federal projects ready to go so that when we do get our federal funds, which I think we will eventually, but we still need to be able to spend that money because we lose it at the end of the fiscal year if we haven't spent it all. So there's a little timing dance there with all the budgets. Thank you so much for your attention today. I know I covered a lot of ground, but it's important to understand how project cost increases and the federal budgeting process impact our projects on a month-to-month basis. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Meg, you can see that we all are noticing the fact that it's a very complex situation. We appreciate the time and the effort that our staff, the executive team, and everyone has put their time in to explain to us what is going on. And again, I think we need to stress how important and how thankful we are for what the governor and the legislature has done this year in the state of Georgia is putting funds in. So hopefully that will keep us going as best that we can until the federal comes through. And as you've just said, have our projects ready to move when they are. At this time, I see Jeff Lewis would like to make comments, ask questions. Jeff?
Thank you. Meg, in your presentation, you did mention the inflation as it relates to material cost, and my question it goes beyond that. You may have inferred it, but I missed it. But what about the labor cost component of it, whether from a general standpoint, or is there any type of specific labor inflation that you may be noticing or that stood out?
So the yellow line is the employment cost index,
Okay.
and so that's a reflection of labor. But we are definitely seeing that in our projects as well, and I don't think that's ever going to come back down. So, and some of it may have been needed, but yeah, labor is a part of that as well.
No, let me add to that. I'm not an economist, but I play one at work from time to time. The red line, the Highway Construction Cost Index, I believe in some of the other reading I've done about this is employment sort of a factor into that, the commodities, you know, since the red line is sort of the bid cost, federal highways consolidation of bid cost across the nation, sort of the power producer index is in that because it takes energy to manufacture asphalt and concrete and aggregate and to haul materials to and from a site. Employment costs are built into those bid prices. So, Mr. Lewis, I think it's a little bit of probably all the above of the green, the blue, and the yellow go into the red, plus some other commodity-driven things. But labor is certainly a part of that as well. And we do know that in general, that labor costs have adjusted, just like they have in every sector. I think that's, it's been a pretty standard issue, no matter what sector you're in, is labor drives a good component of that.
Yeah, thank you. If I have a follow-up?
Have a follow-up?
Yeah. And believe me, I appreciate the complexity of this presentation. You did a really good job unpacking it, but if I understood part of it correctly, when you were mentioning some of the relationships between federal policy and guidelines and our policy and guidelines, it just seems like there's a natural or some type of conflict built in between all these policies and the timing. To that end, is anything being done that you're aware of to address trying to remedy or mitigate some of those conflicts?
I don't know that I'd call it a conflict. I mean, if the federal budget is funded, then it's just the timing of how we manage our program, and it shouldn't be a problem. That 3-month gap is not that big a deal. And like I said, and sometimes it works to our advantage to get additional money at the end of the year. The conflict is that we don't have a federal budget. And so I think no matter what the timing of the state fiscal year and federal fiscal year would be, when you don't have your full budget and you're working on a full year's worth of projects, that's going to be a problem.
And I would say, I mean, we're very accustomed to Congress doing a continuing resolution from October, usually to December or January. They traditionally get to the new Congress. So we've become very accustomed to that and can usually schedule and adjust for that through, again, advanced constructing, basically paying it forward. Like I like to call it, we pay it forward and get an IOU from Sabrina. And if Sabrina David could fix any of this, she would. So don't go bombard her after this presentation. This is not Sabrina. This is a lot of complexity in Congress. But when the continuing resolutions go past January, then it just we can't overextend ourselves, as Meg said. And when they have gone past January, it's usually been just another couple of weeks, But now we're in March, and reading the tea leaves and Josh's map showing that Congress is actually going to be out. The House is actually out. Is it next week or the following week? Which only leaves 1 week to solve. And there's 2 continuing resolutions. One has everything to do with Department of Defense and border and all that. So you see how that's going in the media. Our continuing resolution for transportation is a separate package, which you would think would have some ability to move forward, but time is short and there's a lot of complications. So we can do Jeff Lewis for Congress and fix it. So that'd be our recommendation.
Do I have any other additional comments or questions from our?
I'd like to make one point. I mean, our system of doing business is we don't spend money we don't have. That's the real key, because we don't get caught on all this inflated things going on these projects, right? Because once we let a project, money's in the bank, and that makes a huge difference.
It does. That makes us a good business partner when we get into these situations where we're in these budget hiccups. We know our projects are all funded, and we don't have to worry about paying people.
Any additional comments or questions? Thank you, Meg, for a good report. I won't say it's great because we need the money, but nevertheless, thank you so very much. At this time, I'll ask Andrew Heath, who is our Deputy Chief Engineer, to come forward and give us an update about the NEVA procurement.
Well, thank you, Madam Vice Chair and members of the committee. I'm very excited to come before you today to give you an update on our NEVI program, the implementation and procurement of our Round 1 sites under the NEVI program, and ask for the committee's approval for the apparent best value selections for the first 5 sites of this program. So just from a quick agenda, I want to give a little bit of resetting the stage, an overview of what the NEVI program is, how we are implementing it here in Georgia, and then get into the specifics of the Round 1 procurement, the award recommendation, and then, as I mentioned, ask for the committee's approval and recommendation to the full board later today for the approval of the apparent best value proposers moving forward. So just again, to reset the stage, what the NEVI program is, National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program. This is one of the new programs that was introduced in the IIJA as that was passed in 2021. What that program does, the intent of the program is to build out DC fast charge. So think of your Tesla supercharge type network, but the faster charging stations, 20 to 80% charge in about 20 to 30 minutes across the country. A number of rules and regulations that flow with that program as to how we have to implement it, but we are underway in doing so here in Georgia. One of the first things we had to do with the NEVI program was to develop what's called a NEVI deployment plan. You can see an image of the cover of that plan here on the screen. Our planning office did a tremendous job of developing that plan and having it approved back in 2022. What you are seeing here is the first update that was done in August of 2023. Having a compliant plan through the Federal Highway Administration and the Joint Program Office over to the Department of Energy gives us access to the approximately $135 million to Georgia to then deploy these EV charging stations across the state. The plan got into a lot of detail around stakeholder outreach, engagement with industry. It laid out our alternative fuel corridors, which is where we are deploying these charging stations, and I'll show you a map of that shortly. And then got into how are we going to go about contracting and procuring for these EV charging stations, because this is obviously a brand new thing for the department, so we really had to learn the industry from scratch. So you have seen this slide before, but just a reminder that sort of the vision and goals that came out of the plan and have been integrated into our procurement, and we will be carrying these into future procurements as well. First and foremost, we want to be compliant with federal regulations. That goes without saying, to make sure that the guidance and rules that are being pushed from the federal government are being integrated into our projects and into our procurements. We want to make sure that our projects and our efforts are customer driven, right? So as we deploy these charging stations, we want to be thinking about it from a customer service perspective. If you are driving up to an EV charging station, you want to have a pleasant experience, just like you want to have if you're going to a gas station. So we want to make sure that those elements are prominent within our documents and prominent within our procurement process, and that we are targeting those things out of proposers through this effort. We want to make sure that we're pushing economic development. You've all heard the discussion about how Georgia has become a national leader in the EV industry. We want to make sure from an infrastructure perspective, we are providing that leg of the stool, so to speak, in that regard as well. So again, having that economic development mindset in mind. We want to leverage the private sector expertise in this industry. We do not anticipate, and we will not be owning or operating EV charging locations across the state, just like we don't as it relates to gas stations, right? So a similar position for the department, leveraging their expertise, leveraging their knowledge and their ability to carry this out. And that is what has guided us to our procurement process in this program. And finally, we want these to be sustainable and reliable, all right? So that as you approach and utilize these EV charging stations, you want to make sure that they work, right? And so we have an operate and maintain component to these projects for the proposers. The map on the right shows the alternative fuel corridors. The roads highlighted in yellow, those are where we have gaps in EV charging. And the rules and guidance of the NEVI program dictate that the first locations to be targeted with the NEVI program fill in those gaps. And you can think of a gap as a 50-mile segment of those corridors. So that is where we targeted the rollout of the NEVI dollars in our implementation first and foremost. What you see on the right with those circles are the round one Georgia NEVI locations. So we initially targeted 5 locations, again, taking a small step to engage industry, understand industry, and start the implementation of this program. So the 5 locations, well, we call them the Fort Valley location, the Tifton location, the Dublin location, the Metter location, and the Brunswick location. And you can see those approximate areas here on the map. So taking the tenets of the NEVI plan and the vision and goals that I just walked through, we initiated a P3 procurement beginning last summer for these 5 Round 1 locations. We received proposals in November, and we evaluated those proposals over the winter and into this month. The P3 Steering Committee met this morning, in fact, to recommend the approval of the apparent best value proposer for each of those locations, and that's what I will be asking for the committee's approval here at the end of the presentation. The P3s are a full design, construct, operate, and maintain contract. As I mentioned, we will not be owning or operating these locations. We will be leveraging the proposers to operate and maintain for a period of 5 years after construction. And there is a number of requirements in the contract to operate at a specific service level, again, targeting that customer service-driven deployment for these locations. So what I would like to do now is walk through the evaluation results and the award recommendation from the P3 Steering Committee, again, that just met this morning to make this recommendation. So starting with the Tifton location, you can see the PI number 0019828. The recommended best value proposer is EnviroSpark Networks. At the site host for this location is a Waffle House on 7th Street West there in Tifton. You can see the project payment cap. You can think of that as the cost for the project. That's all inclusive, including the O&M of $825,182.07. I will note that EnviroSpark Networks is a Georgia company, and they are a certified MBE here in Georgia. So we're very pleased to see their participation in this program. For the Fort Valley location, the recommended best value proposer is Francis Energy Charging, with a site host at Wendy's on State Route 49 in Byron, just off of I-75 there, with a project payment cap of $849,584. For the Dublin, Georgia location, the recommended best value proposal is Silver Comet Energy Incorporated, with a site host location of the Racetrack gas station. That's a brand new Racetrack gas station there on US 441, with a project payment cap of $619,575.87. For the Metter location, again, the recommended best value proposal was EnviroSpark Networks, incorporated at a Shell Superstop gas station on Lewis Street there in Metter, with a project payment cap of $686,406.48. And then finally, at the Brunswick location, the recommended best value proposal is Love's Travel Stop and Country Stores Incorporated, with a site host at Love's Travel Stop on Highway 17 there in Brunswick, with a project payment cap of $650,000 flat. So this slide just summarizes the apparent best value award. And Madam Vice Chair, at your pleasure, I would ask for the committee's motion and approval to recommend to the full board for the approval of best value for these locations.
You've heard the recommendation.
I got some questions too.
We would like to have the questions answered now, or go ahead and with the motion made in a second and then questions.
Go ahead, Madam Chair.
Okay, we'll go ahead and I'll ask for a motion.
I'll make a motion.
I have a motion. Do I have a second? All those in favor? Okay, let's have our questions next. And doing the questions, I think I saw Jamie first.
These locations.
Yes.
On these locations, is an additional property bought next to these locations, or is the location included in the current?
The location is included within the site host property, right? So they, as part of the proposal, the developers provided a site design of the property with that site host. So think of the racetrack, for example. The racetrack has a layout. The EV charging was then designed and placed within that property.
do they lease that property? Is that property leased?
They
or-
typically have what's known as a site host agreement between the EV charging company and the property owner. So they have an arrangement between those two entities.
So
as
it's
to-
it's leased, I would
Essentially
imagine.
like a lease, yes,
Sure.
correct.
So this is just of the property that's already developed.
Mhm.
It's a portion of the property that's developed,
Correct.
and it goes there, and they pay a lease to the property owner for 5 years. Is that how long? Or does the lease go further than that? Does it?
Our requirements are for 5 years. They may have an arrangement that it would go for longer than that. That would be up to them as to that specific arrangement. But I do appreciate how you sort of brought up that it's on existing facilities, existing property. As I mentioned, what we wanted to value was, again, that customer service driven aspect, right? So when you think about a racetrack or a fast food location, you have amenities at those locations, right? You have restrooms, you typically have lighting, you have vending, things of that nature, food, drinks, that type of thing. We wanted to see those aspects be provided so that you didn't end up with sort of an isolated EV charging station with nothing else in that surrounding area, right? So we wanted to have that customer service driven.
Waffle House,
behind it.
they have such small locations, and that's what's amazing to me, that
Yeah.
they could include that on their site.
Yeah, that
They
would have been,
typically a half an acre.
right, that would have been a discussion between the Waffle House and the proposer to bring forward that proposal to us to say, hey, we're willing to carve this up to have these locations made available for this service.
Is there any size requirement? I mean,
Yeah, so the NEVI requirement is 4 locations. So you would think of that typically probably as 4 parking stalls, right? So, and each one has to be 150 kilowatt hour charging at those 4 locations. So generally 4 charging stalls. They also have to be ADA compliant, so you probably have some additional width as part of those as well.
thank you.
Yeah.
Jeff?
Thanks. I have 2 questions. The first question is kind of related to what Mr. Boswell was touching on, but I think the best way I can ask this question is looking at this chart here. If you could just briefly explain, and I think you may have to some extent, the difference between the least expensive being Dublin and the most expensive being Tifton. Why is that? Why is there disparity or difference?
So all respondents responded to the same requirements regardless of site, right? So they would have to then go work with equipment providers, with utilities, with their site hosts, all that to get one all-inclusive cost for the full contract. So naturally, depending on who they're working with and what those markets are, they're going to get different prices. I will say we were quite pleased with what we got from a project payment cap between that 600,000 to 850,000. We have seen other results across the country that have varied more wildly than that.
Okay, thank you. My second question, this may be a bit uncomfortable question, but with the advancement of technology in this area, is there a plan for if and or when these things might be obsolete?
So our contracts are structured so that at the end of the 5-year O&M period, the state backs out of that agreement, right? And then the site host and the developer can maintain the operation of that facility moving forward. So we are entering into a partnership with these entities for a 5-year period. But beyond that, then GDOT will be backed out of that arrangement under this contract structure. So looking out to the horizon as to what happens from an EV perspective or any alternative fuel, we are entering into a 5-year partnership through these arrangements. Beyond that, we'll have to see where it goes.
And Andrew, to add to that, though, if they wanted to exceed the minimum federal requirements of the 4 150 kW ports, that's allowed.
That's correct.
And so you're seeing entities like Tesla and everybody else being able to do higher than that now, charging rates. So it's sort of complex, but I always sort of compare it to the size of your gas hose. If they want to bring a bigger gas hose, they can. So, but again, we've got to be federally compliant. They have to meet the minimum. So future proofing is something the industry, I think, will continue to evolve. And if they, a year or two in, they say, hey, I want to upgrade this to a 350 kW, support, they can have at it. You know, it's their business model. They want to be the ones to, you know, have customers using their facilities.
Kathy Williams, board member.
I have a couple of questions. You've answered most of my questions, and I appreciate that. I noticed that on the map, there were a couple that were close to, like, I think one was Valdosta, or to, you know, close to the border. Do we look at the gap or where the services are on contiguous states? Okay, so that is taken into account. And then you said 4. Is that a minimum, or is that the total for each one of these is 4 stations?
4 minimum per.
But the minimum, but did all of these
Yes, they
first
also
5
put-
come in with 4?
Yes, that's
Okay, and then when do you anticipate for round 2? Because, I mean, you can see the whole southwest side of Georgia's not
I've
going.
got a slide on that.
You, boom. Thank you.
Jamie?
The payments, is that a one-time payment?
No, sir, no. The payment is structured upon their work performed, so we have structured payment essentially as they carry out activities. They bid pricing for various activities, so we would pay as those activities are carried out.
But just one was $800-something thousand.
Correct.
Do they pay that up front, or over the 5 years? What happens at the end of the 5 years with the $800-something thousand?
Well, the 800,000 would flow from the department to the proposers, right? So think of that as their bid, right? So as they carry out the work, as they accomplish certain elements, they will then be invoicing the department, which we would then, just like any of our construction contracts.
Any additional questions?
To add to that, and
Okay.
there's a bond as well, so, you know, we're not gonna end up with a stranded asset. There's a bonding, if, you know, if something went south or didn't go well, we have a bond in place too, to continue to make sure everything works.
5 year, do you pay again at the end of 5 years? Or?
No, it's prorated, so there's payment, for like the install, there's so much allocated for the install, the actual capital investment, and then there's payment over the 5 years for the operations and maintenance. And again, that was part of the competitive tension, that's why they're all a little different, because as Andrew said, power's different, distance to run power, you know, whatever those site host agreement values are, you know, that's again, letting the private sector, you know, solve this in a very competitive way for us.
Kathy?
Is there a distance from the interstate? What is that? I'm just
Within 1 mile.
1 mile, all right, thank you.
I'm gonna throw out a question. Has anybody thought about, how you, on an emergency situation, how do you charge one of these up in the middle of the interstate?
That is a great question. There has been a lot of discussion working with first responders and through the incident management community as to how you deal with, you know, an electric vehicle that has gone dead, how you deal with an EV that may be on fire. So there's been a lot of discussion about, because these vehicles are fundamentally different than an internal combustion engine, and we want to make sure that our incident management community and first responders are prepared and understand how to address that issue.
Anyone else with a question or comment? A great discussion, good answers, a lot of information is needed. We have
And I
a
would like
motion.
to say this, they've done a great job in putting this program together too. They have worked hard. I can tell you from my own experience and being in some of the meetings, so thank you again for all the great work that's been done.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. We have a motion on the floor. We have a second. I'm going to call for the motion. All those in favor, please say aye to go forward.
Aye.
Any opposition? Seeing none, the ayes have it. Thank you very much, Andrew.
Thank you. And if I may, just one final slide, next steps, getting to your question on next steps. And I misspoke, I don't have phase 2 on here, but I will speak to that. But next steps for phase 1, we will be back to you next month to ask for your approval for financial close. So the action that we hope the board will take later this afternoon will allow us to now engage with the apparent best value proposers to finalize the final form of contract over the next month. And then we anticipate being back to you next month to then enter into financial or approve financial close. Then moving forward, we anticipate notice to proceed in April to get these guys going. Looking at the timelines for this type of effort, we expect getting to the point of opening up these EV charging locations and providing that service to the public. That's probably going to take about a year. So think early 2025 and throughout calendar year 2025, these beginning to open across the state. Now to phase two, Ms. Williams, to your question, our intent is to embark on the remaining AFC locations, all inclusive as phase two. So that includes everything on US 27, everything you saw on that map. That's approximately 30 additional sites that we will be embarking on. We anticipate the notice of intent to advertise being posted no later than May 1st for round two.
I do have one other question. There's already private stations that, you know, kind of cover a large gamut. Are we coordinating with those as well? Do we have a map of like all the infrastructure, and that's where we're finding those gaps, taking
Correct.
into consideration
So
other private? Okay,
If
thank
you
you.
see on this, on the map, what's not highlighted in yellow, those are locations where we already have privately built NEVI compliant chargers. So some of the state was already covered, so to speak. So that's why you see some of the gaps already being filled in, right? So what we are doing through the NEVI program is targeting those gaps. Yes, yeah, where they do not exist.
I'm sorry. In Columbus, you know, we have and it is a specific, I think, Tesla, you know, but there's like 30 banks or stations at a target. Is that identified in the scope of this network?
If it is NEVI compliant, right? So if it is a DC fast charge with minimum 4 kilowatt hour to 150 kilowatt hour locations within 1 mile of the interstate, and providing a CCS connection, that is a NEVI compliant location, and we surveyed the entire state to understand where those are, and that is what's reflected in this map.
Thank you.
Any additional comments or questions? Seeing none? Thank you, Andrew, so
Thank you.
very much. Is there any additional comments or questions for our committee of the whole? If not, we stand adjourned.